Hi, and welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. Tonight we're going to talk about the landmarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our opinions and thoughts are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions, either here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'd also appreciate a thumbs up and especially any comments on our videos.
Last time we were talking with Brother McKeown, we got to, I believe, landmark number 7, was it, Matt?
I believe, we finished talking about number 7. We're on to number 8, which is the ability to make the Grand Master to make masons at site.
So first, I'd like to recap this. What we're doing here is enumerating the 25 landmarks that Mackey imposed on us. It's been adopted by a number of American states, but it has no real authority. There's another list of 54 out there. I have no idea what's on that list. And there's a trimmed down list of 11 and another that figures that only about 4 of them are actually landmarks. But defining a landmark, of course, has always been our trouble, and which is why many jurisdictions don't bother to actually enumerate them. So you say we were up to number 8, which is a very controversial one. The prerogative of the Grand Master to make masons at site. So some jurisdictions permit this, others don't. The confusion in many quarters is that we haven't defined what making a mason on site is. For those jurisdictions that do not permit it, the picture in their mind's eye is that the Grand Master just simply lays on his hands and says, poof, you're a Master Mason. But now British Columbia does not allow this. Does Washington?
No, we do not.
Okay. So I understand in those jurisdictions that do, basically, in its most restrictive form, all it allows the Grand Master to do is to have a degree team, confer the 3 degrees, waiving all requirement for any waiting period between each one, so that it can all have. But the candidate still goes through, experiences each of the 3 degrees.
That's important.
Now, without defining it as such in British Columbia, the Grand Master, according to our Constitution, does have the authority to waive the 2-week waiting period between each degree. So by that restrictive definition, then British Columbia and Yukon does allow the Grand Master to make masons on site. But generally, making a mason on site is far more open to interpretation. And you, in fact, have had some jurisdictions who have attempted to make someone a mason on site who is no longer with us on this physical plane. And that, of course, doesn't wash. At its most open, yes, it simply allows the Grand Master to go, poof, you're a Master Mason. What is then required, and this, I think, is probably the justification in some jurisdictions for the 1-day classes, where they confer all 3 degrees in 1 day. And as far as I'm aware, not my jurisdiction, in those jurisdictions that do that, the brother who is now a Master Mason still has to petition and be accepted into a lodge through the usual process, to sponsors, investigating committee, ballot, 1 black ball, 2 black balls, whatever. But it's still, to get into a lodge, he still has to go through that process. What happens, say, in, is it Ohio, I think, who has their 1-day classes of thousands? what happens if a brother is made a Master Mason in a one-day class and then cannot find a lodge to take him in as a member? What happens then? I have no idea. And that might be a question for you to ask somebody in one of those groups.
Well, I find that interesting how they can do that, because is there not the requirement to prove up in between each degree before receiving the next degree?
Certainly in our jurisdiction. Now, this is very much, as far as I'm aware, a North American phenomenon. It is not found in England, Scotland, or Ireland. They are baffled by the concept of a one-day class, much less the concept of the Grand Master having the authority to do this on site. So it is definitely not a landmark. So looking back at our definitions of landmarks, there have been two that have been proposed in the past. One of them is that this is a rule that has been with us since time immemorial. Well, we know that this one has not been with us since time immemorial. The other definition of landmarks is, let's see if I can find this, something to the effect of, if a landmark is something that if it was taken away or changed, then it would no longer be Freemasonry. And by taking this authority away from the Grand Master, that would not mean that we were no longer practicing Freemasonry by any definition of Freemasonry I can accept. So I don't see it as a valid landmark on either count.
I can agree with you on that one, because I can't see it either.
So I think we've settled number 8. Number 9 is the necessity of Masons to congregate in lodges. That one, I would tend to say that certainly that goes back to the old charges. That you didn't, and the old charges, which were, of course, for operative stonemasons, and you didn't want itinerant masons wandering around. You wanted to have some connection with some guild, with some lodge. Much the same. We don't make it a rule in British Columbia, Yukon. I don't believe it's a rule in Washington, but we certainly encourage sojourning brethren, ones who have moved here, to affiliate with a lodge. About the only way that it sometimes is enforced is in one of the concordant bodies, which require their members to maintain a membership in a lodge, will also require it to be a lodge in the same jurisdiction that concordant body is in. This is not strictly followed, and I can name probably 3, 4, 5, maybe a half dozen brethren in British Columbia who do not have memberships in lodges in this jurisdiction, but maintain a membership in a lodge in, most of them in Scotland, actually, or an honorary membership in Washington State or something like that. And this allows them to participate in their Royal Arch or Scottish Rite body, although they rarely, if ever, attend lodge. If they did that, then I think they'd probably get nudged. But again, it's just it's peer pressure. There are no rules in this jurisdiction.
So that's a good question for you, because actually there was a conversation the other at our last meeting about this, as we had affiliates joining, and there was a brother that belongs to a lodge on the coast and has a life membership. He's not too active out here because he's afraid that this 3-visit rule might come in, and he would get turned away. He's under the understanding that he's only allowed to visit a lodge 3 times as a member that's a member he's not a member of. I said, that doesn't make any sense, because I mean our whole premise is to go visiting, right?
Yeah. So to explain to our Washington brother, actually the rule in this, the constitutional rule in this jurisdiction, is that an unaffiliated brother, so he's a member, you say, of a lodge on the island. So as a member of another lodge, this rule doesn't kick in at all. It's actually 2 meetings. And the rule says that no unaffiliated brother can visit a lodge more than twice without the permission of the lodge.
Okay.
And I cannot imagine a lodge telling someone to go away. So
I've known it to happen, unfortunately.
well, actually, I can't imagine it happening, but certainly not in this case.
Yeah, my understanding of the Code of Washington, which is not always as good as it should be, is that the like, for instance, if you're dropped for not paying your dues, you're dropped from the membership rolls of your lodge. Your status becomes that of an unaffiliated Mason, I believe is what it says in the code. And so, in theory, you're still a Mason, but you're not a member of any lodge. And so, weird things happen there.
I'm not sure, but I also think your code says that if he hasn't paid up within 2 years, then he actually gets suspended for non-payment. But I'm not sure.
Right? Yeah. If you don't pay your dues, in theory, for 1 year, most lodges wait another year for you to not pay your dues. But then if you're in that status for less than 2 years where you haven't paid your dues, then you can just come back by paying up what you owe. And if it's more than 2 years, then you have to repetition to join.
Right. So I don't know if you're permitted to visit in that case. In British Columbia, and I believe across Canada, when you are suspended for non-payment of dues, your membership is suspended. You are not in good standing. You are not in good fiscal standing. You're not permitted to visit any lodges.
Which would make sense, but yeah.
Now, in some European and other jurisdictions, you don't pay your dues, you're still considered to be a Mason. And you can turn up anytime, any number of years later, and become a contributing member again. But because these are jurisdictions that don't issue annual dues cards, there's nothing to stop them from visiting elsewhere. Mm-hmm. I'm not entirely sure how that gets policed. I can only keep track of my own constitutions.
Again, that would require a lodge to tell somebody they're not welcome to come. So,
well, quite so.
And we're also happy to see visitors all the time. You know, I wonder often if guys actually get asked for to prove themselves, etc. Because I know in the past when I've gone to lodges that I've never been to before, they've sometimes asked, sometimes not. Probably, I'm going to say 50% of the time I never got asked to prove myself.
And certainly, if you visit a lodge where you are known, if you have visited before, there's someone there who knows you. In future times, no one is going to be checking your dues card.
Right.
About that too much. But I think this is a good rule. I'm not going to say it's a landmark, but I suggest that one of the main purposes of Freemasonry is getting together, shaking hands, speaking face to face. This is wonderful doing this through Zoom or whatever this is, but nothing beats sitting down with somebody, meeting someone on the level in the real world. And I think that pretty much could almost be said to be, if not a landmark, certainly a defining characteristic of Freemasonry.
I wholeheartedly agree. You can read all the books on Masonry you want, but being there and experiencing it is a totally different animal.
Reading the ritual at home, participating in the conferral of a degree, two entirely different animals.
Very much so.
So perhaps we could say, and I believe number 9, the necessity of Masons to congregate in lodges, turns up on all of the lists. I'm pretty sure it's on that list of 11. Certainly on the list of 11, probably on the list of 4. I think it's one of the Eastern Seaboard states has adopted 4, and I can't remember which one. So 9, 10. The government of the craft when so congregated in a lodge by a master and 2 wardens. So this one comes close to a landmark, and being time immemorial, it wouldn't. Yes, in fact, it might be in the Hollywell manuscript. I'm not sure. Certainly, that a lodge has to have a master is a time immemorial, and I suggest without that, we would not be Freemasonry. and although they have practical roles in the lodge, the wardens could have any title, and still do those those jobs, but within the context of the ritual and ceremony itself, as representatives, you know, of the 3 points in the lodge, the 3 lesser lights, the 3 greater lights, we talk about threes. Perhaps it could be argued that without the master and the 2 wardens, would not be Freemasonry. So,
yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? I mean, they're essential to running the lodge as the principal officers. Everybody else can seem to be, you know, filled in last minute. I would say, yeah, that makes total sense to me.
And definitely, as I say, they have a practical role, but also on a symbolic level. I mean, we're talking about wisdom, strength, and beauty. You know, we're talking about id, ego, superego. We're talking about any number of threes, groupings of threes within not just our symbology and symbolism, but within the larger culture of esoterica. Let's not go down that rabbit hole, but that's part of that. Is although many of our leaders have recently stated that there is no esoteric or spiritual component to Freemasonry, I would argue otherwise.
Yeah,
not tonight. That's not tonight.
Yeah, but I agree. If you could call them president and first vice president and second vice president, but the fact that there are 3 of them and the roles that they play in the lodge are more important than the words.
Yeah, the titles are only relevant so much as we take them from the stonemason guilds. Well, we take the term master from the stonemasons guilds or any guild. We take wardens from the Christian church. So yes, certainly they could have other names, but why? So, the right of every Mason to be represented in all general meetings of the craft and to instruct his representatives. So this is not a time immemorial, maybe. I don't have a copy of the Holywell manuscript in front of me. The Holywell manuscript, or the Regis poem, is the oldest extant document that we've got. Dates roughly to 1400, give or take a decade. And all of the other old charges, the instructions for stonemasons, and their legendary history, their mythology, yeah, all of those are built on a similar document that would predate all of those. And I'm not sure, but I think this would certainly be part of the Scottish tradition, which stonemasonry takes some of its traditions from, the cultural, I'm not going to say Celtic, but certainly Northern Irish and Scottish community concept of a certain rough democracy that Freemasons or the stonemasons, I suggest, took their idea of having an annual meeting. And originally, the Grand Master was elected just for that period of that meeting to settle any disputes, to prove apprentices, to take on new apprentices, to prove fellow crafts, to make them mastery, all of these sort of things. And that would not have involved them being representatives of their lodge. I don't know. So let's set aside that. Let's set aside the historical part of it, and look at it from the other defining characteristic of a landmark. If it was removed, would it no longer be Freemasonry? So something that Grand Lodge British Columbia and Yukon has wrestled with countless times in the last 30, 40 years, 30 anyway, is giving the Master Mason the vote at Grand Lodge. And I don't really care one way or the other, and I don't see it changing the composition of our decision-making at our Grand Lodge. But symbolically, I'm against it, because the Grand Lodge was established not to represent the brethren, but to represent the lodges. So ideally, and this is how Scotland does it, and there are many ways that I think we lost our way and we should be returning to how Scotland does things. In Scotland, only the master and the wardens have a vote at Grand Lodge. They can be directed by the lodge how to vote. Past masters don't get a vote. In fact, past masters in Scotland don't even get rank. They become brothers again.
Excellent.
Oh, yes. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe there is no permanent rank in Grand Lodge either. There are other interesting aspects of Scottish Freemasonry that we won't go into this evening.
So is that kind of like not having to remember titles and things like that? Because after they serve their time, they go back to being a brother?
For the most part, I believe. See, if somebody has done, and that was the way it was in this jurisdiction originally, if someone does a truly spectacular job, you can vote in Grand Lodge to give him permanent rank. And the rare person would get permanent rank. But over the years, we don't like to hurt anyone's feeling, and everybody's got to get a brownie badge. So everyone gets permanent rank. And that's the way it happens in this jurisdiction, and I suspect in most North American jurisdictions. But as I say, the purpose of Grand Lodge was to represent the will of the lodges. They sent their 3 representatives or their 3 proxies. They, depending on the jurisdiction, were required to have 3 proxies there. They couldn't get out of being represented. They were mandated to, sort of like voting in Australia. But the minute we gave past masters the vote, of course, that defeated that purpose, that intent. And in this jurisdiction, British Columbia and Yukon, we gave past masters the vote right away, mostly because many of our members at that time had originally joined American lodges where that was the practice.
Yeah, there's been a lot of question as to why a past master has a vote, but a regular master mason doesn't. It's always posed a good question in my mind, because it made sense to me having the 3 representatives of the lodge being able to vote on behalf of the lodge, because that made it a fair, equitable voting system, if you will, so that each lodge would have an equal vote. And you know, those lodges that have 200 plus members, that, you know, they would rule every vote if they all showed up, right? So I get it, and I like the system, but it never made sense to me why a past master would then still retain his vote.
No, and as far as I'm concerned, he shouldn't. But having given themselves the franchise, they're not about to surrender it.
Yeah, someone explained it to me once, and I have sort of mixed feelings on it, but they were saying that the master of a lodge, in theory, at least in Washington, could be elected from amongst the brethren, you know, immediately. And in theory, for without passing through the chairs to be wardens and all that sort of stuff, that they could just be put in the master's chair. And then in theory, they could go to Grand Lodge and vote the lodge's vote, which they can. That's fine. But the inclusion of the past masters was to act as a dampening effect on changes within the jurisdiction, that people could, in theory, if there was some hot issue and all those young whippersnappers decided to vote the same way, that us wise past masters would say, "Oh, wait a minute now. Let's all think about that for a moment." And maybe, but it's.
I suggest that that's a post hoc argument. And all things in Freemasonry, I always look at our history and I look at the symbolic meaning. Because far too many of our members don't have enough going on in their real life, I think. I'm not sure that they have to make Freemasonry their real life. And Freemasonry is just a symbol of our life. It shouldn't be our life. I spend all the time you want in it and revel in it, but it is still all about its symbolic value and every aspect of it, the lessons that it's trying to teach to us. So,
yeah, there is a brother up in our jurisdiction that, we asked him, what do you like to do outside of lodge? Because, we were trying to find out more about our brethren, right? And he said, I don't know. Is there something other than lodge?
Well, and perhaps the same could be said of me. There's little that I do that doesn't have some relationships to the lodge, but it's a very broad relationship. And I do have friends who aren't Masons. There are a few of them there. But returning though to our landmarks.
I think we may have skipped over the necessity of every lodge when congregated to be duly tiled.
We did, number 11. So, yes, that one is both, that qualifies under both counts, time immemorial lodges, and that was one of the main reasons why the medieval Catholic Church condemned the stonemasons, was because they met in secret. Two things. They met in secret, and they elected their own leaders without consulting either the church or the state before doing so. So we're going to wrap this up now, are we? Oh, he just went silent on me.
Oh, yep.
No, go ahead and finish up what we're talking about. Meeting in secret or tiled or in private, the idea of privacy is a time immemorial practice in Freemasonry. And I would suggest that if we change that, if we didn't continue to tile our meetings, we might as well just be the Rotary or the Lions Club or a bunch of guys meeting at the pub.
I agree. It's definitely, if anybody knows anything about Masonry, it's that, well, you do things in secret. That's definitely one of the defining characteristics of the organization.
I had a whole argument, discussion, we'll call it, with a lady at a pub in Calgary the other day. Her daughters are in Job's daughters, and of course her husband asked the question, so I was getting involved in the conversation, and then she says, "But everything you guys do, everything's secret." No, there's no secrets in our lodge. Everything's online. You go find it, right? I said, the only thing we have secret is modes of recognition. And she said, what do you mean? Well, we have modes of recognition where one Freemason may know another in the dark as well as the light. And I said, and truly, if you look hard enough, I think they're online too. So there's really no secrets. And
the modes of recognition, again, a symbol. So the secrets of a Freemason have no value in and of themselves. As you say, they're all over the net. They've all been all over newspapers. But they are a symbol. The fact that the three of us will not discuss those with anyone, it's a symbol of our fidelity, our trustworthiness, our bond, all of that. The actual secrets are immaterial. But we do have secrets, not so much secrets, but privacy. When we decide to help out a brother or just someone in our community, and we take a vote in lodge about that. Anything we do in lodge, it's not about secrecy, it's about privacy.
Right.
And
exactly.
That's what I try to stress.
We had a guy who was interested in joining our lodge who was very upset by the idea that he shouldn't tell his wife what happens in the lodge. And I sort of said, well, and he works in the financial sector. And I said, well, in the same way you wouldn't tell your wife what happened with your clients, you probably wouldn't tell your wife what's going on in the lodge. Oh, no, we can't have secrets like that. Well, maybe it's not for you then.
Precisely.
All right. Well, this will bring us to the